Hey folks, welcome back to the Corax and Coffee Cast. I'm your host, Pete Steele.
And I'm your other host, Rick Hendricks.
And we are all about playing tabletop games in public.
And we're all about bringing new people into the hobby and pushing back against the stereotype that gamers, especially board gamers and nerds, are asocial beings. Games are a social activity, and it really helps to have some social skills to play them.
So today we're going to be talking about table rules in tabletop gaming. But before we get into that, we do want to thank our behind-the-scenes contributors, Keegan King, who's the producer of our podcast, Sarah Vasa, who is our social media manager and general editor of all things Corax and Coffee, and our game enthusiast consultant, Miss Shaw, who's just always available to talk about what she, as a non-gamer but player of games, thinks about what we're doing.
And so this episode, we're talking about table rules in tabletop gaming. Now, when people hear the word table rules, they think about house rules. And house rule is something that you as your gaming group come up with to make a particular game work better. Like, for example, having a rule where if you land on free parking in Monopoly, you get $500. There are plenty of other modifications of printed rules of a game. Might be a good episode at some point, but that's not what we're talking about here.
That's right. So table rules are not modifications of the rules as they are written for a game. But really, table rules are the rules or guidelines of how players behave and interact with other players, as well as the space that they're in at the gaming table. Think of table rules as rules of etiquette for playing games in groups of people. They're manners, how to convey respect for people, for animals, for property, for people's time, and so on and so forth. And you may think these are common sense, but common sense is A, not particularly common, and B, not universal. Everybody has their own thoughts on what proper table rules are, and every gaming group's table rules will be a little bit different.
And everyone at your table is going to write the unwritten rules in their own way until you clarify them.
And having these rules established with your group will help facilitate bringing new people into gaming. It just makes a space less intimidating to enter if they know what to expect, especially what rules are around when to show up, what might be there to munch on, what the house policy on shoes on or off is, and so on and so forth.
Absolutely. Now, we just want to clarify that these are general rules that we've found work for us and for many others. Not all players and groups are going to agree with all of these table rules we mentioned and discuss, and some rules might not even apply to you and your group. If they don't work for you and your gaming group, don't use them. It's pretty simple.
Right. And we are certainly not trying to make pronouncements or moralize, telling people, you must have this table rule or else you can't play. No. You play the way you want to play. You have the rules that you want to have. But we're hoping that by just talking about some table rules, we're going to help facilitate conversations and help stave off unpleasantness during game nights. Mm-hmm. So, where do we start? Let's start with, what time does game night start?
Yeah, this could be a very contentious issue. We wish that we didn't have to mention this, but please be respectful of other people's time. For a lot of people who game, we have adult lives. We're working a lot, and there just isn't that much time to set aside for things that we like to do, let alone specifically gaming with friends. So do try and make sure that you're respectful of other people's time and you're protecting their ability to actually play with you.
I mean, cars break down, there's traffic, kids get sick, animals get sick, things happen. But call or text if you're going to be late, and certainly don't make being late a chronic thing.
Absolutely. And don't expect people to deal you into a game if you come late in the middle of it. Sometimes this can be done, sometimes it's easy, but in some games, you just have to wait for the next round or something.
Right.
Also, some groups have a social hour without games before or after the main game time. Others don't. It doesn't really matter where your group lands on this, but it's good to come to a consensus. So an example of a table rule here for when do we start might be something like, people start wandering at 5:30, and we chat and we eat and whatnot, but we've all got to leave by 8, so the first die gets thrown at 6 o'clock sharp.
Right.
If you're not here yet, or you want to chat more, then too bad. 6 o'clock is game time.
I would also say have a clear child and pets policy for game night. Again, if you can't find a sitter, maybe you just have to call your group and say, hey, I can't make it this week. I can't find a sitter. Not to say children are bad or children should be excluded from game night. Not saying that at all, but not all games are suitable for all ages. And it can be really distracting and difficult to get in good gaming if you have screaming children who are sick or tired or cold or cranky.
Or just have a short attention span.
Exactly. And also just have a clear pet policy. Allergies are a thing, so if one or more of your gaming group members are allergic, maybe you need to find a new place to host the game, including a shop. And also, if somebody does bring a pet, because pets are allowed, and there's food, please be respectful. Some owners allow their animals to eat people food, and others don't. So definitely defer to the owner on that.
Sure. And discuss it so that you aren't fighting about it. That's
right.
Most of what we're getting to here. And speaking of food, you need to talk about what the expectations are for everybody's food. Does everybody bring their own food? What is the policy on greasy food that are going to hurt the game components? This is another thing it's important to talk about beforehand because some folks are shy and they won't ask for a drink even if they're parched, while others will just assume that things are cool until they're confronted. A simple, we've got water, soda, and chips in the kitchen, so help yourself. Just use a coaster, please. That helps that shy person know what the deal is, and it keeps you from having to talk about coasters anymore.
And everybody has their own kind of culture and philosophy and way to do this. When you come into my house, whether you're there for game night or for any other reason, I try and make it very clear, hey, my refrigerator and its contents is your refrigerator and its contents. I will certainly serve you if you want me to serve you. I'm more than happy to do that. But please, if you're hungry or thirsty, just go. You do not need to ask me. Just take whatever you want.
Sure.
And in the same way, I want my games to be played. So I'm like, hey, please play my games, but I also want my games to last because I'm a player and a collector. So I think it's important when we're talking about food to talk about treating game components with respect. Mm-hmm. Many games are expensive.
And you're not going to know how much somebody loves this game.
Exactly.
For all you know, this is my grandpa's favorite game, and I've had it forever, and now you got pizza grease all over it.
Right.
You're not going to know that until I tell you.
Or if the game is out of print, or it's not your property. So again, please, I want other people to play my games, but I do not want grease or red sauce or anything else on my game components. So please, be aware of whoever the owner of the game is. Wash your hands, keep your greasy fingers away unless they think it's fine. Mm-hmm. I think with hand washing, if somebody in your group says, hey, can you wash your hands? Just do it. Just say, yeah, sure, no problem. I would say also have a beverages near or far from the game board policy. So related to coasters, are you allowed to have open beverages on the same surface as the game table? Because, we're all adults here, but accidents still happen, even with best intentions and being careful. And, nothing ruins game night faster than soda sloshed all over $100 game.
Right.
So do you need to have a separate area for beverages or just put them on little beverage cup holders, TV tray stands or whatnot away from the table? You can kind of figure that out, but be aware that that's an issue.
Sure.
And you can say, well, hey, if I cause a problem, if I spill something on someone else's game, I'll just replace it. It's well, that's very nice and a nice thing to do, but not all board games are replaceable.
Well, and the other thing about this is if you discuss it, if you come to an agreement, then you've come to an agreement and everybody can move forward from there. If we don't discuss it and Pete has his soda right next to my board game, and I really wish he wouldn't, but I don't feel comfortable talking about it, now I'm uncomfortable the whole time and I'm angry at Pete, and there's no need for that.
Right. So, on game night, Rick,
mm-hmm.
Do we decide in the moment what we're playing, or should we decide in advance?
In general, you want to decide in advance. It comes down again to gaming time. If you've got 2 hours to play, do you really want to spend half an hour debating what you're going to be playing?
I want to play.
Exactly. When we've got everybody in the room together, let's sit down, let's play. We can decide what we're playing over text. And similarly, I don't really want to be learning how to play while I play. Not from square one anyway. A lot of newer board games have videos to show you a few turns of the game. And watching those before you come to game night can save so much time. It may not clear up the entire set of rules, but it means that everybody is at least sort of on the same page and has a vague idea of what we're doing. You might also consider sending out PDF of the rules to everybody and have them read it before they arrive.
Right. In the board game community, there's so much discussion about the reading of rules because players love to play games. They hate reading rules, right? That's, there with a few minor exceptions, that's a general consensus. And there's so many conversations about, how do we teach these games, get through the teacher, the rules or the video so we can play the games, right? And I think at some point in the future, we'll do our own take on how to teach rules effectively. But it's always helpful if people go into board game night at least having some exposure of how a game works.
Right. You want to be talking clarification, not, so what are we playing now?
Exactly. And when you are playing a game for the first time, or at least for the first time for some of the group, even if it's just one person, it's important to have what I call a teaching game. Some people could call this a practice game or take your action back game or whatever. I call it a teaching game where players are allowed to practice a round or two or five or maybe the entire game so they really understand the flow of the game before things get competitive. If there's a competitive element in particular, right? So a teaching game can be, if there's hidden information like hands of cards or whatever else, play with those hands open. And have players kind of discuss out loud their strategy for why they're doing what they're doing, especially more experienced players.
Exactly.
Yeah, certainly not to quarterback, not to tell other players what to do on their turns, but to just have a very open verbal game about what is happening so people can kind of pick up on the flow and general strategy of the game.
In general, it's always better to talk about your turn rather than, oh, that's a dumb thing you did on your turn.
Yes. Talk through your turn. Exactly.
It's much easier to say, oh, okay, that's interesting. I have these two cards. And you might not notice that these two cards play off of each other really well. So I would do this. Or I'm holding out for this third card that I know might come in. It's a lot easier to get into the strategy and help somebody out when you're talking about your turn as opposed to when you're talking about their turn.
Right. And I think we're going to talk about this a little bit more later, but related to teaching games, if somebody takes an action or a move that's a particularly bad one, other players can say, hey, if you do X, then Y negative thing is about to happen. Like, let them take that back if they didn't realize. Like, oh, shoot, no, I'm going to do something else. We're learning here.
Sure. It's always good to be forgiving about mistakes, whether that be a strategic error like you're talking about, Pete, or whether it's a blatant rule violation.
Right.
Oh, well, you can only play one card a turn, and you played two cards, and don't be yelling at people for that. As the saying goes, there are no symphonies without middle school band.
That is the saying.
We always start out not really knowing what we're doing. And sometimes it's ugly, but you don't get to where you want to be without going through that awkward period. So it just needs to be okay. You need to be willing to help people through it. You need to encourage and teach and never criticize, especially when people are new.
Right. And I think there needs to be a clear point, whether it be halfway through a game or on game 2 or 3, where you make it clear it's like, hey, we're really not in teaching game mode anymore. Now your moves really count, so no backsies at some point.
Right.
No backsies when it becomes the next person's turn, and just be clear and consistent when that occurs, and be consistent for most people.
Right. Training wheels are coming off.
Yep.
And we are now treating you like an equal.
Yes.
And let's have some fun.
Yeah.
And if after that point they lose the first couple games, that's okay.
That's fine. And not to say teaching games aren't fun, because they are fun. Mm-hmm. It's a different dynamic than when the training wheels come off, as you say.
Speaking of training wheels.
Yep.
What about player death?
Oh my.
So there are some games, particularly role-playing games, where they last more than one session. So instead of coming in for a game night and you leave and it doesn't really matter what happened, Hrothgar the Barbarian, if he dies, he dies. It's probably worth having a conversation about whether you're going to allow that to happen. I know a lot of gaming groups will have the person running the game tell someone, are you sure you want to do that? Because that sounds really dumb to me. And allow them to take it back before they risk dying. And some games make it clear from the outset, if you're stupid, you're probably going to die. And that's just part of the game. And player death isn't always a bad thing, but that's another whole episode.
And I'm glad you said it's not always a bad thing. I have been part of gaming groups where everyone was friends, but when the dice hit the table, everything was cutthroat. There were no backsies. When you died, you died. If you made a mistake, that was on you. And that's just how that group was. Not to be mean, not to be unforgiving, but it's just like that was the culture of that group. And that group, for those players who are very experienced gamers, really enjoyed that. And when somebody died, it kind of became a joke. It's like, well, live and learn or die and learn. And that's totally fine. That's great. However, it's important to be aware that that culture, while it can be wonderfully satisfying for experienced gamers and for people especially who know each other, that is not a great environment for new gamers.
Yeah.
Except those who have very specific personalities. For some people may really enjoy that. But for the most part, that's just not a great culture to bring in new people. Different strokes for different folks.
If someone's significant other just started playing the game, maybe try not to kill off their character in the first 5 minutes of play.
Right.
Generally isn't going to go well.
I mentioned this a little bit earlier, this idea of quarterbacking. I want to come back to it real quick, if I may.
Mm-hmm.
And quarterbacking is different from coaching. Coaching can be okay sometimes. Quarterbacking really isn't. So quarterbacking is basically where one player, especially when you have a cooperative game or a team-based game, where one player will say to everybody on their team, hey, you do this, you move your people here, or you roll this, and then I'm going to do this other thing. And they kind of just give instructions to everybody on their team. And the problem with this is that it can be fun to feel like you're playing this grand strategist, but it really just turns every other player other than the quarterback into a non-player. It turns those non-players into basically the appendages of the quarterback, and really makes it one player just directing human player pieces. It takes away a lot from everybody's decision-making ability. It's just not satisfying play. It can be frustrating, and it's not a good way to get new players to be invested in the game or learn how to play well if they're just being told by a quarterback, do this, do this, do this.
And you're also just asking for problems, right? What happens when one of the appendages does something they were told not to do?
Right.
Right? You have free will. You're able to do what you want in your game, and you thought on your turn it was a better idea to do X instead of Y. If that works out well, people are still going to be mad at you. And definitely if it fails, people are going to say, look, man, why didn't you just do what I told you to do? Because I'm not here to do what you told me to do. Yeah, don't get into that situation. There are a couple games where that's almost the point of it. You probably know the game I'm thinking of. It's the space game.
Space Alert?
Right, where having somebody in charge of the plan can actually be helpful.
Yeah, sure.
Not what you want to do in your D&D game or most other games.
Right, and for all of these kind of table rules that we mentioned, certainly use what works. We're going to keep coming back to that. Use what works, don't use what doesn't work.
Mm-hmm.
But there are also, like Rick, you mentioned, there certainly are games that, because of those rules mechanics, make some of these table rules apply less or not at all, make them not at all applicable.
And the great thing about that one is when the quarterbacking fails, it's hilarious.
It sure is.
because it's like, okay, we had two people pressing the space bar and nobody reloaded the batteries, and therefore the rest of the things we did were useless because there was no charge in the battery. But anyway.
So for game night, pick a game everybody will enjoy.
Absolutely. The goal is to have everybody have fun. If your goals are different, that's going to be a little bit more difficult. You can find some amount of consensus, but, at some point we really can't help you. And in picking a game that everyone's going to enjoy, you have to have a system to do that. It probably shouldn't just be, the person who's hosting decides what we play. You're probably going to want to have everybody come together and voice an opinion. You can take turns choosing, you can vote on it, but you have to be intentional about letting everybody choose.
Right.
Another note on that is if you always vote and somebody's game is never chosen, just be nice and give it a shot.
And you can always do things like round robin, like, Betty chose this week, so Ronnie chooses the next week. You can certainly do any kind of system that works for you and your group, just it's important not to let voices go unheard.
Right. And if you notice that your system isn't working for somebody, try and accommodate. Conversely, if you're the one picking the game and everybody always groans when you pick the game, try picking something else. Again, we're aiming to have everybody have something they can have fun with. You'll get there.
If a game is selected that you just really hate, don't like, don't want to engage with, aren't feeling it that night, whatever, sit out. That's okay. You can absolutely sit out, grab snacks for people, observe, try not to completely disengage from the group for the evening. Your time and your game will come. Just kind of be casual about it, be flexible, be easygoing.
This is an important point because you're supposed to be bringing an energy to the playing table.
Right.
You know, it's supposed to be something that's exciting and fun. And if you can't bring that, then, you know, certainly don't bring negativity or whining.
Right. If you just can't engage with a game but are a player, like, that's not a good situation. And again, you know, so people have off nights, people get stressed and anxious, and that's not what we're talking about. If you're having a hard week, we're not saying don't go to gaming group. Maybe that's exactly where you need to be, and that's fantastic. But we're saying if you just can't engage with a game because you don't like that game, sit out. That's fine.
Right. And don't be embarrassed doing that. That should be okay.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Related to that.
Yep. So I think you're right that getting out at the very beginning is the best place to get out because you really don't want to abandon games halfway through.
Oh, no.
And it's almost worse if you play through, but you're just sort of phoning it in.
Mm-hmm.
If you're not really paying attention or engaged, or if you're whining the whole time. It's very frustrating to be the person who's reading the rules and explaining the rules and setting everything up, only to have people bail on you right before you actually start playing. Please don't do that to people.
And don't tank the game intentionally by playing badly so the game will end. That is just a miserable move.
Yeah, that's a bit obnoxious.
I wish I didn't have to mention this. Please stay off your phone while you're gaming. Like, even if it's not your turn, especially when it's not your turn. Distracted play is not engaged play. Multitasking is really not a thing. A lot of games, planning your turn before others take their turns will help speed up everything considerably. It adds to the flow of the game, make everyone more engaged.
And give everyone less time to be wondering what's on their phone.
Exactly.
Bathroom breaks, it happens, especially if you've got a long session going. If you gotta go, you gotta go. This is not a time to go to the bathroom and have a 10-minute text conversation.
I've seen players do that, or not seen them, but just know they're in there texting. It's obnoxious.
And just in general, it's good to try and schedule this to limit game disruption. I just finished my turn. I've got 10 minutes before it's my turn again. This is the time. Not, oh, it's just my turn. Everybody hold on. I'm gonna go to the bathroom.
Right. Rick, what's the deal with table talk? And I'm talking about, being at the table talking about either non-game related things at the table, or talking about things at the table related to the game when the rules strictly either prohibit or discourage you having those conversations. It can be either one.
It definitely depends on the group, and it depends on the game. Obviously, cheating is a bad thing.
Yes.
So if you're supposed to be keeping your information secret and you're not doing that, maybe don't do that. A little bit of psychological warfare can be fun in the right group and in the right place. Generally, I say if the joke is at least a 7 on a scale of 1 to 10, I go for it, and otherwise I keep my mouth shut.
Fair. I would say also it's, being around the game table for many games, certainly not all games, it's not the time to be having crosstalk about what to pick up for your cousin Alana's wedding or whatever.
Oh, no. The line gets blurred.
Oh, sure. Absolutely.
You talk about somebody's personality in the game and, a lot of these dice superstition things, right? Technically, they're table talk. They're not about the game, but, it is fun to say, oh, yeah, his dice always roll bad when he's trying to get out of a scrape. That's fun. You don't want to spend all night doing it.
And we're not saying thou shalt not talk while playing games. That's not what we're saying. Like, you're there to have fun and socialize, right? And the game is a medium for that, connecting with your friends and socializing. So do what works for you in this area.
But it's something you should talk about, like all of these other things, and make sure everybody's on the same page. Or at least can live with the page they end up on.
Rick, I want to talk about first player preference and priority, which is a table rule that has a little bit more tech behind it, a little bit more crunchy mechanics behind this one. Many games tell players to select the first player through any mutually agreed upon method, right?
Someone's got to go first.
Somebody's got to go first. And many games have kind of a silly thematic way of determining which player goes first, which is really just another way of saying through any mutually agreed upon method. Oldest person first, or youngest person first, or the host first, or the host last, or roll dice, or whatever, right?
Or the last person who's been on a boat goes first.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And for some games, first player matters less than others, right? That being said, most, if not all, games have a first player advantage. Mm-hmm. In that the first player of the game has a distinctly higher chance of winning said game, including games like chess, but many, many other games as well. Modern games are working hard to combat this advantage, right? By adding rules about adding extra rounds to an end of the game, or giving non-first players additional resources when they start, or whatnot, to try and eliminate that first player edge, but it's actually quite challenging.
Most of the time, this isn't going to be an issue.
Exactly. Vast majority of the time. However, when it's an issue, it is an issue.
Right. And some people are very rule conscious and very power conscious, and this may well become an issue for you. You know, if it becomes an issue, you might want to have a standard policy on it, whether that's making sure that the way you select this is truly random or going round robin. You know, it's not worth arguing about.
So let's talk about an area of table rules that ruins friendships.
Okay.
And that is rerolls and cocked dice.
Oh, see, that's totally worth arguing about.
But is it?
No.
Oh, we could do an entire podcast on this, but nobody would listen to that. So let's just talk about it briefly.
Yeah.
So games that involve dice.
A lot of role-playing games. Not all, but yeah.
A lot of role-playing. But a lot of war games.
Oh, sure. I mean...
board games and so on and so forth. They're
Monopoly, Boggle, I guess, technically. Yeah.
Yes, those games do include dice. Not what I was thinking of, but yes. So, when you roll dice, do you play the dice as they lie no matter what? Must they land on a table or in a dice tray or somewhere else? Must they land on the game board?
Do you have to roll in front of everybody so everyone can see what the result is? Or are you allowed to roll it behind a screen? There's sometimes people are concerned that folks are lying. To combat that, does it have to land in a dice tray? What about palm rolling and dropping?
Oh my goodness, that drives me crazy.
Yeah, it is obnoxious.
Palm rollers and droppers, can't deal with that.
Yeah, if you have a special way of rolling your dice that doesn't amount to blowing on it and praying real hard and tossing it, yeah, it's just not fun.
And by the way, I just have to say this. If you roll your dice in any sort of intentionally wonky way...
there are people who will put the die on their palm and then snatch their palm out from under it so that it lands where it belongs. That's what you're talking about.
Exactly. And everybody knows what you're doing, and it's not cool.
No.
Unless your gaming group is cool with it. So, whatever.
Sure, but not at my table.
Yeah, not at mine either.
So then we get to talk about cocked dice.
Yikes.
If it's on top of something, if it's a little bit at an angle, and, it's mostly a 20, but it could be a 2, what do you do with that?
So here's my question, Rick. Cocked at what angle? At what number of degrees?
Oh, gosh.
I have seen gamers bring protractors and have a degree cutoff. I don't do this because I think it completely disrupts game flow and kind of ruins the spirit of the game, but this is a real thing. Rules
lawyer meets the dice.
Does rerolling depend on the die result? Like, do you, if a die is cocked and it's a success for, situations where we're talking about success or failure in dice rolls.
Sure.
But if a die is cocked at some angle and it's a success, do you re-roll it? Or if it's a failure, do you re-roll it? Or do you re-roll everything or nothing? I mean, I know it seems like we're splitting hairs here. And you are until you encounter the situation with somebody competitive or argumentative. And then it becomes so real.
And then they try to use whatever the rule is to get the result that they want.
Right.
They say, oh, that wasn't a good roll, but luckily it's on this piece of paper, and therefore we need to re-roll it. Whereas that they wouldn't have brought this up if it had been a good result. So I figure if you're going to re-roll cocked dice, you got to re-roll them every time.
I think, people listening to this might be like, well, you guys must play with jerks and just unreasonable people. Like, we have no issues with my gaming group. I'm like, first off, I'm so glad you don't have issues with your gaming group. That's fantastic. And I will say, no, I don't just play with jerks and sticklers. Like, I certainly have played with individuals like that. My point is that I have played with many different people, and it comes in all different varieties. And so better to kind of cut this off ahead of time. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Anyway, then you get into asking if all dice get the same rules treatment. Are we as concerned about, I rolled 30 dice and I added them up? Do you care about, die number 6 here and whether that needs to be re-rolled? And then there's unintentional rolls where the dice sort of slip or fly out of your hands.
Yep, it happens.
What do you do with that? And just like any other die roll, sometimes it's a terrible roll and you really wish you could take it back. And sometimes it's a natural success. And what do you do with that? Another big issue that I see often is players rolling dice when it's not their turn to roll dice.
Not their turn to roll dice, or it's not quite the right time in the phase or turn to roll dice. Something else has to happen first.
Right, exactly. So for example, in a role-playing game, someone might say, I talk to the guard and I roll. And then based on what the number comes up on the roll, they say, I got a natural 20 to, convince the guard to let me through.
Not at my table.
No. There's no rolling and then you say the thing.
Nope.
Usually a good rule of thumb is you don't roll at all until the dungeon master asks you to roll.
Yeah.
Because then the other thing is, a lot of people seem to think that if they roll a natural 20, they're able to do whatever they want.
Not how it goes. It depends on the group. But again, not at my table.
But, the way it should go is player A says, I flap my arms really fast and I fly. And then the DM says, no, that's not a thing. You can't roll for that.
That was oddly specific.
I'm not sure it's been exactly that, but
okay.
It's you can't just ask to do an impossible thing and roll for it. Now, obviously, in certain universes, things that are impossible aren't actually impossible. If you think you might be dreaming, maybe the DM says roll for it, and that should be a red flag. Also with dice, there are these electronic dice, right? Like dice apps on your phone.
I think that's really just up to the gaming group. There are things to consider there, but
yeah.
Pros and cons to that one.
I think technically it's not random, but it's close enough. But again, make sure everybody at your table is comfortable and knows the rules and can't squirm out of the rules, because some people will try.
So here's my question.
Mm-hmm.
Do all players get the same treatment? Have to follow the same rules when it comes to dice? Or can you have different rules for different players?
Yeah, DM's dice fudging. It really depends on how much the players trust the DM to serve the story and to serve them. And it depends whether you want the DM rescuing you from your stupidity or do you want brutal, deadly fairness. In my opinion, if a DM is going to fudge the die roll, he shouldn't roll. If there's only one way for the story to proceed, you just shouldn't roll for it.
There's no point.
Exactly. If the whole story gets kicked off by one of the party members finding this magic sword that's going to lead them on the quest, don't roll to see if they get the magic sword. What are you going to do if it lands and they don't? Just skip that bit.
And I have definitely been part of role-playing campaigns where everything was rolled or almost everything was rolled. And as the dice landed, that's what happened, period, the end. Which is some interesting philosophical mechanics thing, right?
Sure.
But one advantage to that I have found, if you have the right group of people, is it leads to some very improvisational skill sharpening. It's like you thought you're going to go one direction, the dice said otherwise, so it's like we got to rethink the plan, up to and including rolling new characters.
So, and another thing with DMs is you do occasionally need to hide the roll. Knowing whether this person that you just lied to believes you changes your actions, right?
Right.
So if this person has a good enough poker face to let you continue to hang yourself with the rope he's giving you, you might want to roll that behind the screen, and at some point you've got to trust your DM to have that sort of power where you might not trust a character to do it. But, the DM could roll for you also on cases where you're not supposed to know whether you succeeded or not.
So related to power, in a way, it's kind of a forced transition.
Sure.
I want to talk about rules lawyering and rules clarifications, because games require rules, but games are certainly not the rules. So, how long do you have players go searching for that rule online or in the rulebook, or do you even allow online looking up? How long do you search, stalling the game, before you just make a ruling that could be right or wrong according to the written rules and move forward so you can continue to play?
Yeah, agreeing on what the rule is now and debating the errata later is a totally valid choice.
Yep.
It's not worth spending all night arguing. And frankly, if you're arguing about it, it really could go either way.
Right. And players will argue a rule that will advantage them, right? That's
certainly some, yeah.
Yeah, certainly some. I don't think there's anything inherently wrong with that, as long as they're being reasonable. There's nothing wrong with advocating for yourself as long as you're being reasonable about it.
Sure.
But what's not reasonable is coming up with a ridiculous interpretation that simply advantages you, or stalling the game for half an hour.
Until people give up and just say, okay, have it your way so we can...
Right.
Yeah, no. Again, it's about being respectful of people's time. We're here to play a game. We're not here to debate what's on page 73 of the rulebook.
Right.
My take on it is, yeah, you should be very willing to just move on and do a rules correction later.
And related to that, and again, I wish I didn't have to bring up this one, don't be a sore winner or a sore loser.
Mm-hmm.
The prolific and famous game designer Reiner Knizia said something to the effect of, your goal should be to win, but it's the goal that matters, not the winning.
Absolutely. If you're role-playing, it's very satisfying to chase the good story. Getting into trouble doing something fun and stupid is great, because without trouble, there is no game. In LARP, we always say, trouble is currency. If I'm not in trouble, I'm bored. But even if you aren't role-playing, that moment when your opponent pulls out some insane card combo and beats you, it's a sweet moment for them.
Yeah.
And the story you tell about it later can be sweet for you. So share in the awesomeness of your interactions at the table, rather than being salty that you didn't win.
Right. Win or lose, or if a ruling is in your favor or not, don't simmer. If you think you've been treated unfairly, speak out. Have the conversation and try and have a genuine, open, forgiving, and understanding and empathetic conversation with your fellow gamers who are your friends, or at least the people that you choose to spend your time with.
Sure.
But simmering isn't fun or healthy for anybody.
Either have it out right now or genuinely let it go and forgive.
Yep. Or, keep it in there for now. Hold it. Don't stuff it. Don't simmer. Hold it for now. If now's not the right time to discuss it, you can discuss it later.
Right.
And just say, hey, we're going to have a conversation about this later to resolve it.
But don't be passive aggressive about it 3 years later.
Yeah, that doesn't work. Play honestly, play fairly, assume that others will do the same, assume that others are not cheating. Cheating is just not cool. If this is you, if you are cheating at tabletop games, really think about why you're doing that and what your true goals are. If you do catch someone cheating, give them a benefit of the doubt that they didn't understand the rule that they were breaking, unless it's blatant, if they're adding extra tanks from the reserve while everyone else, to one of their territories where everyone else is out of the room on a break. That's not okay, but confront them respectfully. Don't shame them. But if you do have a chronic, blatant cheater in your gaming group, well, the group really needs to have a conversation about whether that's the place for them.
Sure. But it's still better to lose because someone else is cheating than to have a big blown out argument over somebody who's not cheating, but you just think they are.
Yeah, you can address it later.
So coming at it from the perspective of we're all friends here until you're very sure that you aren't is very helpful.
Right.
So speaking of being helpful, don't come to the game already drunk and obnoxious. Nobody really wants to babysit.
Yeah.
And people shouldn't be cursing your name as they clean up after you once you've left.
Right. Or during.
Yeah. But this is especially important in more physical games. Many LARPs have strict rules about alcohol in combat because nobody wants people getting hurt. And the more you've had to drink, the worse a judge of what's going to hurt people you are.
I think it's important to have clear expectations about trash talk. What's acceptable and what's not acceptable. If everyone is laughing and having a good time, you're golden. But it needs to be genuinely in good fun. Saying it was just a joke when somebody's clearly upset is not okay. That does not cut the cheese.
Accidents happen, mistakes and boundaries happen, but yeah, you need to be really exercising that empathy that we keep telling people that you have and figure out not what you would want to have happen to you, but what they want to have happen to them.
Exactly.
Don't poke the thing you know they're insecure about.
Right. And I want to be very clear that chronic trash talking when someone is not okay with it is bullying, which is never okay under any circumstances ever. So again, not to make this super ugly, but like that's what it is. So you need to be very clear on what's acceptable in your gaming group. And also keeping in mind that some gaming groups are all about the trash talk. They still have incredible respect for each other. Trash talk is just part of the culture of that group. And that's great if everybody is truly okay with that. Go for it. You do you. Keep in mind that culture of a gaming group, while it may be wonderful for you, more power to you, is not the best environment for newcomers. So just keep that in mind.
Yeah, it's probably not a closed system. Be careful when people come in. And do make sure that you're not scaring people away from your gaming table. We have few enough people to play with as it is.
Right.
In gaming and in life, try to be nice to each other.
Yeah. And I would say don't push people on their boundaries around particular table rules, because that's what table rules are. They are boundaries for people and groups. If you have folks in your group who need an accommodation for a particular table rule, have that discussion. People are diverse. We need to celebrate that diversity. We should love celebrating that diversity. And so there need to be accommodations for people who have food restrictions or allergies or may need to wear their shoes inside because of a issue that they want to disclose or they don't want to disclose. And, the sky's the limit there. But, it's also, really, if somebody says, please wash your hands before you touch my game, don't push back on that. Just go wash your hands.
And you can maybe discuss your boundaries through calm and genuine conversation, maybe even bringing in a third party, but never push or violate boundaries. If somebody doesn't want shoes on in their house and you don't have
a reason to wear shoes,
just go along with it. This may well be more important to them than it is to you.
Right.
And if it's very important to both of you in different ways and you have a fundamental conflict with your gaming group, that's okay.
There are other gaming groups.
There are. And everyone can find a place to play.
Yeah.
And it's really not helping anyone to be on each other's nerves about the same issue every time you game.
And like we have said throughout this episode, this is all about setting expectations, clear communication, helping people have a good time, helping people feel comfortable and welcome and engaged, and also welcoming new people into the hobby, which is what we're really about.
But this is why we're having the conversation at the beginning, is so that everybody knows, okay, this is the deal here.
Yeah.
Is this the boat I want to be on?
Have good hygiene, take showers, brush your teeth, blah, blah, blah.
Always important.
Always important. Wear clean clothes as much as possible. Don't tell other people how they must play, because they don't have to play the way you play. Take what works for you, leave the rest.
These can lead to uncomfortable conversations, but those uncomfortable conversations can be okay. Discomfort is not always negative, and discomfort can't be avoided forever. Usually better to address these things openly rather than letting them fester.
Right. And so many people think, oh, I'm uncomfortable, this must be a bad thing. That's how we're enculturated, right? To think discomfort, always bad.
Mm-hmm.
And while many of these conversations certainly can be uncomfortable, just because something is uncomfortable doesn't mean it's a bad conversation to have.
True.
So, we certainly have not covered all possible table rules. There are dozens and dozens or even hundreds more that we have not covered here as potential rules or topics for rules for gaming groups. So we would love to hear from you. Let us know what we missed. Let us know what game rules or table rules are important to you.
And hopefully we've managed to get the ball rolling on some of the thoughts you might need to discuss for your table. But by all means, if you do have comments, please tell us in the comments below.
I love hearing about gaming group table rules that are different from mine.
That's how we figure out what rules to have at our tables.
That's right. Yeah. Thank you, folks, once again and always for listening to the Corax and Coffee Cast. I am your host, Pete Steele.
And I'm your other host, Rick Hendricks.
Until next time, take care.
Take care.
Who do these guys think they are? Did they try the quote thing this week? Oh, that is it. One more slip up and I'm gonna make them sound like chipmunks. Watch.
Cheating is just not cool.
Ha, see that? Anyway, thanks for listening to the Corax and Coffee Cast with your plagiarizing hosts, Pete Steele and Richard Hendricks.
Play honestly, play fairly, assume that others will do the same, assume that others are not cheating.
Listen to him. Anyway, the music, audio production, and these little outros are by Keegan King. Thank you to our contributors, Sarah Vasa and Miss Shaw. If you like the podcast, I don't know what to tell you.
But don't be passive aggressive about it. Never push or violate boundaries.
You're right. If you liked the podcast, you might enjoy our written game reviews, unboxing videos, print and play game content, and so much more good stuff. But who even needs to know this? I'm done.
Really think about why you're doing that and what your true goals are.
Yeah, fine. Please also consider following us on social media, signing up for our newsletter, and just generally interacting with us. You can also visit our merch store and/or support us on Patreon to get access to behind-the-scenes stuff at whatever amount you think our content is worth. The quote of the week: people get built different. We don't need to figure it out. We just need to respect it. Also, here's a bonus that I liked from the episode.
In gaming and in life, try to be nice to each other.
Corax and Coffee. Tabletop gaming. Caffeinated.